Well, hello. My name is Mike, and welcome to my channel. On July 7th, Harper magazine released an open letter titled, quote, "A Letter on Justice and Open Debate," end quote, which has caused a lot of stir on social media. The first paragraph is pretty bland. It acknowledges the long overdue demands for racial justice and police reform, and also says that Trump is a force of illiberalism, which is, all true. I'm not going to read that part here because there isn't much to really sink our teeth into. I'll leave it up on screen for a few moments, so feel free to pause the video to read it, or you can click the link provided in the description box. However, at the end of the first paragraph, it careens wildly off the road when it attempts to grossly conflate someone like Trump, who literally tear-gassed peaceful protesters so he could take a bad photo, with the supposed evils of the other side. Basically, they're playing the centrist game and trying to two sides the conversation. And that sets the stage for the second paragraph, where it really takes off. It reads, quote, "The free exchange of information and ideas, the lifeblood of a liberal society, is daily becoming more constricted. While we have come to expect this on the radical right, censoriousness is also spreading more widely in our culture. An intolerance of opposing views, a vogue for public shaming and ostracism, and the tendency to dissolve complex policy issues in a blinding moral certainty. We uphold the value of robust and even caustic counter-speech from all quarters, but it is now all too common to hear calls for swift and severe retribution in response to perceived transgressions of speech and thought. More troubling still, institutional leaders, in a spirit of panicked damage control, are delivering hasty and disproportionate punishments instead of considered reforms. Editors are fired for running controversial pieces, books are withdrawn for alleged inauthenticity, journalists are barred from writing on certain topics, professors are investigated for quoting works of literature in class, a researcher is fired for circulating a peer-reviewed academic study, and the heads of organizations are ousted for what are sometimes just clumsy mistakes. Whatever the arguments around each particular incident, the result has been to steadily narrow the boundaries of what can be said without threat of reprisal. We are already paying the price in greater risk aversion among writers, artists, and journalists who fear for their livelihood if they depart from the consensus or even lack sufficient zeal and agreement." End quote. The first thing that really struck me about that paragraph is its complete lack of concrete examples or evidence of any kind. We're left with a bunch of vague examples that will likely provoke anger in the reader, but no real substance. For example, the editors are fired for running controversial pieces point could be referring to Tom Cahn's editorial titled, quote, "Send in the troops," end quote, in which the senator calls for an, quote, "overwhelming show of force," end quote, by the military to subdue Black Lives Matter protesters. Couple this with Cotton's tweet from a few days before the editorial, which called for no quarter given, which means mass murder of civilians by the US military, and you can quickly see why the paper was heavily criticized. On June 5th, the paper put up an editor's note, which stated that the piece was factually inaccurate, rushed through the editorial process, and was needlessly harsh. In other words, any firing that took place was done because, now wait for it, they didn't do their job properly. And it wasn't a tiny mistake either. They printed a piece by a US senator that could be read as calling for the mass murder of civilians by the US military, and they did it without having senior editors read it before being published. As a result, the opinion editor resigned, and the paper was hit by a record number of subscription cancellations in a single hour. Now, you might be saying, see? Cancel culture. But what that really is people saying they're not interested in supporting a paper that posted what amounts to a call of violence towards protesters. The New York Times is allowed to print the piece, but people don't have to subscribe to their service, especially when they're acting irresponsibly with their platform. Should those people be forced to pay for a service they no longer want? And you could go through the rest of the examples given in the letter the same way I have with this one, and guess at what they're trying to say. But bottom line is that it's intentionally vague, unsourced, and obviously meant to stoke fear in the reader. And sometimes fear is the right response, but if you're going to try and raise an alarm about some sort of free speech Armageddon on the horizon, you better come with some actual concrete examples, or don't be surprised when you're heavily criticized. And that's what this piece actually amounts to. A call for the unwashed masses to shut up and passively listen to their horse shit. These people are longing for the old days where people had a handful of TV channels to consume, leaving them to dictate to us what we should believe. With the advent of social media, regular people can get online and tell them what they think in real time. We're no longer dependent on rich, affluent intelligentsia. We can speak our own minds, and there's power in that. But let's not be mistaken here. A lot of those people who signed this open letter are millionaires, and in J.K. Rowling's case, a billionaire. To think that they're being silenced is absurd. J.K. Rowling has enormous amounts of power. She has been trending on Twitter for several days, and she has far, far more influence and power than the minorities she often takes to social media to bludgeon. What they're bemoaning here isn't cancel culture, but criticism culture. They don't want to be criticized when they make mistakes, rush out poorly thought out opinion pieces by powerful politicians, or post turf talking points. They don't want to face consequences for their actions. Consequences for poor, lazy, bigoted behavior is for us poor people. Look, I can be fired for engaging in illegal behavior, even outside of work. If I go into work screaming racial slurs, I'll be fired. We all face consequences, and if you'd rather not be rightfully criticized, then maybe you should do your job correctly, and use your power and influence to raise people up, rather than knock them down. Hemant Mehta, also known as the Friendly Atheist, hit the nail on the head when he replied to Richard Dawkins with, quote, "Leading intellectuals is code for people who can't handle criticism of their worst ideas," end quote. Sure, there are likely scattered cases of people being unfairly fired, but it's not some sort of widespread problem that threatens democracy. At least, not from the left. And that's what this letter is being criticized for. Hell, even some of the signatories are realizing that signing it was probably a poor decision. It's just another attempt at centrist nonsense, which tries to frame both sides as being equally malignant, without providing any evidence that it actually is. If nothing else, the letter is bland, boring, uninformative, poorly sourced, both-sidesing nonsense by rich, powerful people who are tired of being criticized for their shitty, lazy behavior. Anyway, that's my opinion. Feel free to cancel me in the comment section. If you'd like to support the work I'm doing on this channel, please like, subscribe, and comment. If you're able, please consider supporting me on Patreon. And thank you for the kind messages in the comment section of my last video. I appreciate you all. Thanks for watching. Cheers.